Imagine a nightmare that never ends. What if I told you that the family from the Conjuring movie, they're still dealing with the aftermath of what happened in that house? And what the movie didn't show you, what really happened in Harrisville, Rhode Island, is so much worse than anything Hollywood could ever imagine. This is the true story behind The Conjuring, the real Perron family haunting that terrorized an entire family for over a decade. I'm talking about Roger and Carolyn Perron, their 5 daughters, in a 200-year-old farmhouse that should have been their dream home, but instead became their worst nightmare. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Ed and Lorraine Warren called this case one of the most intense supernatural investigations of their entire career. And trust me, what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about the paranormal. But first, if you're brave enough to hear this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what we're diving into today, it's not for the faint of heart. January 1971. Roger Perron, a truck driver, and his wife Carolyn, along with their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, moved into what they thought was their forever home, a beautiful 18th century farmhouse sitting on 200 acres in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The house had character, you know. Old wooden floors, stone fireplaces, sprawling grounds. It seemed perfect. The previous owners, the Kenyon family, had lived there for 8 generations. 8. That should have been the first red flag. But here's what's chilling. When the Kenyons handed over the keys, they said something that still gives me goosebumps. Leave the lights on at night. Leave the lights on at night. They never explained why. They just left. The first few days were normal. The girls were excited, running through the house, claiming their bedrooms, exploring the property. Carolyn was busy unpacking, making the house feel like home. Roger was working long hours, trying to provide for his large family. But then, things started happening. It began with small things. The kind of things you'd dismiss as coincidence. Doors that were left open would be found closed. Items would disappear and reappear in completely different rooms. The family dog, Sadie, would refuse to enter certain parts of the house, particularly the basement. But it was the smells that first made Carolyn realize something was seriously wrong. She'd be cooking dinner, and suddenly the entire kitchen would fill with the putrid stench of rotting flesh. Not garbage, flesh. The smell was so overwhelming that it would make her gag, make her physically sick. But when Roger came home, nothing. No smell at all. Then came the sounds. Footsteps in the hallway at night. But not just any footsteps. The sound of someone wearing work boots. Heavy, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth upstairs while the entire family was downstairs watching television. Andrea, the oldest daughter, was the first to see her. She woke up one night to use the bathroom and saw a woman standing at the foot of her bed. An elderly woman in a gray dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. But here's what made Andrea's blood freeze. The woman was hanging. Her neck was broken, twisted at an unnatural angle, and she was just staring. The woman didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared at Andrea with dead, hollow eyes until Andrea blinked, and she was gone. By spring of 1971, the activity had escalated beyond anything the family could ignore or explain away. Christine, one of the middle daughters, started sleepwalking. But this wasn't normal sleepwalking. She would walk directly to the front door, unlock it, and stand on the porch in her nightgown, staring out at the cemetery that bordered their property. When her parents would find her, she'd have no memory of how she got there. The phantom smells got worse. Not just rotting flesh now, but sulfur, burning wood, and something Carolyn described as the smell of death itself. These smells would appear in different rooms at different times, sometimes so strong that the family had to leave the house entirely. But it was what happened to little April that truly terrified everyone. April was the youngest, only 5 years old when they moved in. She started talking to someone the rest of the family couldn't see. She called him the man in the chair, and she would have full conversations with this invisible presence, laughing and playing as if he were right there. But then April started saying things that no 5-year-old should know. She would talk about people who had died in the house, describe rooms that had been sealed off for decades, and worst of all, she started predicting things. Small things at first. What the weather would be like, who would call on the phone. But then she predicted her grandmother's death 3 days before it happened. The breaking point came on a cold February night in 1972. Carolyn was alone in the house with the girls while Roger was away on a long-haul trucking job. She was doing laundry in the basement when she heard April screaming upstairs. Not crying, screaming in absolute terror. Carolyn ran upstairs to find April's bed violently shaking, like someone was underneath it, trying to lift it off the ground. But when she looked, there was nothing there. Just her 5-year-old daughter, pressed against the wall, pointing at something in the corner of the room that only she could see. "She's here," April whispered. "The lady. She wants us to leave." That's when Carolyn started researching the history of their property. And what she discovered, it explained everything. In the 1800s, the land had been owned by a woman named Bathsheba Sherman. Now, Bathsheba was, let's just say she wasn't well liked in the community. She was accused of being a witch, of practicing dark magic, of sacrificing children to Satan himself. But here's what's documented, what actually happened. Bathsheba was suspected of murdering an infant in her care. The baby was found with a large sewing needle driven through its skull. When confronted, Bathsheba claimed she was innocent, that she was being framed because of her unconventional beliefs. She died in 1885, but not before cursing the land. She declared that anyone who tried to take her property would suffer, that she would never leave, that she would make their lives a living hell until they fled in terror. And for nearly a century, she did exactly that. Family after family had moved into the farmhouse, and family after family had left within months. Some left in the middle of the night, abandoning all their possessions. Others simply disappeared entirely, leaving behind only questions and rumors. The Kenyon family had been the exception. They'd lived there for 8 generations, but they'd also made accommodations. They left certain rooms locked. They never went in the basement alone. They performed rituals to keep Bathsheba appeased. And most importantly, they left the lights on at night. But the Perrons, they didn't know any of this. They'd walked into Bathsheba's domain completely unprepared, and now she was making them pay for their ignorance. The attacks on Carolyn became personal, violent. She would wake up with scratches on her arms and legs, deep gouges that spelled out words she couldn't read. She'd feel invisible hands grabbing her, pulling her hair, pushing her down the stairs. One morning, Roger found her unconscious in the kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes, with no memory of what had happened. But the most terrifying incident, the one that finally made them call for help, happened on a night in March 1973. Carolyn was putting the girls to bed when she heard her name being called from the basement. Not whispered, called, loudly, clearly, in a voice she didn't recognize. "Carolyn, Carolyn, come down here." She knew she shouldn't go. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to stay upstairs, to gather her daughters and leave the house immediately. But the voice was so compelling, so commanding. It was like she had no choice. She walked down the basement stairs, step by step, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The basement was dark except for a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And there, in the corner where they kept the Christmas decorations, she saw her, Bathsheba Sherman. Not a glimpse, not a shadow, not something she could dismiss as her imagination. The full, solid apparition of a woman in her 70s, wearing a tattered gray dress, her hair wild and unkempt. Her eyes, oh God, her eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just darkness. Bathsheba smiled, a horrible, twisted smile that revealed teeth rotted black with decay. And then she spoke, her voice like grinding glass. "Get out of my house. Get out, or I'll make you suffer, like all the others." Carolyn couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. She was paralyzed with terror, staring into the face of pure evil. And then Bathsheba started walking toward her, her footsteps echoing in the small basement, getting closer and closer. That's when Carolyn felt the hands. Invisible hands grabbed her from behind, lifted her off the ground, and slammed her against the stone wall. She felt her ribs crack, felt warm blood running down her face where her head hit the stones. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was what Bathsheba whispered in her ear. "I know about your daughters. Pretty little girls. I wonder what they'd look like. Broken." Carolyn found her voice and screamed. She screamed so loud, so desperately, that her daughters heard her from upstairs and came running. They found her at the bottom of the basement stairs, barely conscious, covered in blood, mumbling over and over, "She's going to hurt my babies. She's going to hurt my babies." That's when Roger made the call. The call that would change everything. He called Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine Warren were already famous by 1973. They'd investigated thousands of paranormal cases, dealt with demons, poltergeists, and malevolent spirits all across the country. But when they walked into the Perron farmhouse, even they were unprepared for what they encountered. Lorraine Warren, a clairvoyant medium, felt the presence immediately. She later described it as the most oppressive, evil energy she'd ever encountered. The house itself seemed to be alive with malevolent intent, and Bathsheba Sherman was at the center of it all. Ed Warren, a demonologist, began documenting the paranormal activity. He set up cameras, recording equipment, and temperature monitors throughout the house. What they captured over the next few days, it defied explanation. Furniture moving on its own. Doors slamming with such force that the entire house shook. Voices speaking in languages that hadn't been heard for centuries. And the photographs? Oh, the photographs showed things that shouldn't exist. Shadowy figures standing behind family members. Orbs of light that seemed to have faces inside them. And in one particularly disturbing image, the clear outline of a woman hanging from the ceiling in April's bedroom. But the most compelling evidence came from Lorraine herself. During a séance, she allowed Bathsheba's spirit to communicate through her. What happened next? Roger Perron later said it was like watching his wife's worst nightmare come to life. Lorraine's voice changed completely. It became harsh, guttural, speaking in an accent from another century. And the things Bathsheba said, the knowledge she revealed about the family's private lives, their fears, their secrets. There was no way Lorraine could have known any of it. "I've been waiting," Bathsheba spoke through Lorraine, "waiting for a family with daughters. Pretty little daughters who remind me of the ones I never had, the ones who were taken from me." Ed Warren recognized what they were dealing with immediately. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a demonic infestation. Bathsheba Sherman had made a pact with dark forces, and her evil had grown stronger with each passing decade. The Warrens recommended an exorcism, not just of the house, but of the family themselves. Bathsheba had attached herself to them, particularly to Carolyn, and she wouldn't stop until she had completely destroyed them. But here's where the real story diverges from the movie. The exorcism never happened. The local Catholic Church refused to get involved. They said there wasn't enough evidence, that the Warrens' investigation wasn't sufficient proof of demonic activity. Without the church's blessing, Ed Warren couldn't perform the ritual. So the Perron family was left with two choices: stay and fight an entity that was growing stronger every day, or abandon everything they'd worked for and flee. They chose to stay. For 7 more years, the Perron family lived in that house with Bathsheba Sherman. They learned to coexist with the supernatural activity, to work around the paranormal events that had become part of their daily lives. But it wasn't easy. Christine developed severe anxiety that lasted into her adult years. Nancy refused to sleep alone until she was in her 20s. April continued to see spirits throughout her childhood, an ability she still has today. And Carolyn was never the same. The physical attacks continued, leaving her with scars that she carried for the rest of her life. She developed a nervous condition, a constant awareness that she was being watched, followed, threatened. The family finally left the farmhouse in 1980. Not because they wanted to, but because they simply couldn't afford to maintain such a large property anymore. Roger's trucking business had failed, partially because he'd missed so much work dealing with the supernatural crisis at home. But here's the thing that will chill you to the bone. Bathsheba Sherman didn't stay in the house when they left. She followed them. Andrea Perron, now in her 70s, has written extensively about her family's experience. And according to her, the supernatural activity never completely stopped. Bathsheba's influence followed the family members throughout their lives, affecting their relationships, their mental health, their ability to feel safe anywhere. Several of the daughters have reported ongoing paranormal experiences, doors that open on their own, voices calling their names in empty houses, the persistent feeling of being watched by something malevolent. Christine Perron died in 2023, and at her funeral, her sisters swore they could smell that familiar rotting flesh odor. Bathsheba's calling card. Even in death, even decades later, the evil that attached itself to their family in that Harrisville farmhouse continues to make its presence known. The Perron family story became the basis for the Conjuring movie in 2013, but Hollywood sanitized the real horror. They gave audiences a neat resolution, a happy ending where the demon is defeated and the family is saved. The reality is far more disturbing. Evil like Bathsheba Sherman doesn't just disappear because you want it to. It attaches itself to you, becomes part of your story, follows you through generations. The Perron family didn't defeat their demon. They learned to live with it. And that farmhouse in Harrisville, it's still there, still standing on those same 200 acres, still harboring the same malevolent presence that terrorized one of America's most famous families. New families have moved in over the years. Most don't last long. Those who do, well, they learn the same lesson the Kenyans learned generations ago. Leave the lights on at night. Because in the darkness, Bathsheba Sherman is still waiting, still watching, still protecting what she believes is rightfully hers. The Conjuring was just the beginning of the story. The real haunting that never ended. If this story kept you awake at night, you're not alone. The Perron family haunting remains one of the most documented, most terrifying paranormal cases in American history. But here's what I want you to think about as you go to sleep tonight. How many families like the Perrons are out there right now? How many people are living with supernatural terror, unable to escape, unable to get help, unable to convince anyone that what they're experiencing is real? The paranormal world is vast, dark, and full of entities like Bathsheba Sherman who feed on fear, who grow stronger through suffering, who view human families as nothing more than toys to be broken and discarded. If you want to hear more stories like this, real stories, documented cases that Hollywood turned into entertainment, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that will keep you up at night. Because the truth about the paranormal world, it's far more terrifying than any movie could ever be. Sweet dreams.